It's just gone 11 a.m. in Rome on Easter Monday, and the Catholic faithful are flocking to Vatican City after hearing the news Pope Francis has died at the age of 88. We're going to a live shot of the Holy City, which will become the focus of much of the world over the next few weeks, as history is made and the Church enters a new era. Today, on A Current Affair, we will take you to St Mary's Cathedral in Sydney. We will take you to a senior Jesuit priest in Brisbane who has met the Pope on several occasions. But we will go now to our Europe correspondent, Edward Godfrey, who has been covering the health of the Pope. And Edward, we know the Pope hasn't been well. He battled through a nasty respiratory illness last month, but he seems to have come out the other side. He was out celebrating Easter yesterday. He was blessing babies. So it does come as a shock.
It does. It comes as a shock. I guess also to many people not a huge surprise as well, because it's just the kind of man that Pope Francis was, and the tributes that are starting to come through are telling of that. He was always trying to work as much as he could, do as much as he could, and be as transparent about the Church and even his health as much as he could. And we saw that during his days in hospital. I was standing outside the Gemelli Hospital in Rome there many days, along with the world's media, and the updates were coming through generally 2 to 3 times a day, and sometimes they'd be quite contradictory. In the morning, perhaps would hear something that would be sound like not great news about his health, and then in the evening it might be kind of almost the opposite, saying that he's done this and that throughout the day and he's made his way to the chapel inside his hospital suite. But I mean, that was part of Pope Francis's legacy and what he wanted. He wanted to be transparent, and his health was moving up and down. We know there were several occasions while he was in hospital that were very serious. There was one incident on February 28th where the Vatican feared for his life, and Pope Francis was aware of that, we're told as well. And it was his personal nurse that's been with him for a few years by his side that insisted that the medical team do all they can to help him get through this. And it's fortunate that that was the case. That was the advice that was followed, because we did see he was eventually discharged from Gemelli Hospital, and there were those jubilant scenes. Lots of people gathered there, very excited to see him make his way out towards the window there, wheeled out to the window to wave to the crowds, and then eventually make his way back to the Vatican. But, you know, as you say, he was coming through the other side of it. He'd been at the Vatican, recovering from this double pneumonia, very serious situation. The surprise meeting with the King and Queen only about a week and a half ago, that was cancelled due to the Pope's health. They did meet in private behind closed doors, and those images and that information was released after the fact. And then even just this past weekend, meeting with US Vice President J.D. Vance, and then yesterday morning, our time, Easter Sunday, making his way out to give that Easter Sunday blessing, saying Buona Pasqua to the crowds gathered. Tens of thousands of people gathered down in St. Peter's Square, and then making his way out on the Pope-mobile. Some beautiful pictures there with children and babies working to the very end. Now, he did look very frail.
Edward, we will have to leave it there. We will come back to you shortly, but let's go now to the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, speaking on the death of Pope Francis.
Australian Catholics and faithful around the world give thanks for the life of their Holy Father, Pope Francis, Bishop of Rome. Today, the prayers of more than 1 billion people from all nations and every walk of life go with Pope Francis to his rest. Born in Argentina in 1936 and ordained a priest in 1969, Pope Francis' fellow cardinals elected him Pope in 2013. His was a papacy of firsts, the first Pope to hail from the Americas, the first Jesuit Pope, and the first to take the name of that great champion of the poor, St. Francis of Assisi. Pope Francis' compassion embraced all humanity, and today he will be mourned by Catholics and non-Catholics alike. He urged us to remember all we hold in common, and he asked the world to hear the cry of the earth, our common home. He invited world leaders to join him and, to quote him, emerge from the dark night of wars and environmental devastation in order to turn our common future into the dawn of a new and radiant day. He was very much a modernist. His message that he sent out echoed in our region during his historic visit to Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, Singapore and Timor-Leste. The first Pope from the Southern Hemisphere was close to the people of Australia. For Australian Catholics, he was a devoted champion and loving father. Pope Francis lived out his faith and vocation in word and deed. He was truly inspirational. In his modest way of life and at his weekly audiences, he demonstrated his commitment to peace, equality and inclusion. Pope Francis's love for humanity was powerful and profound. The memory and example of his compassion will long endure. As we mourn his death, we celebrate the gift of his life and presence among us, and we hold on to the resonant truth of Pope Francis's final Easter homily. The light quietly shines forth, even though we are in darkness. The promise of new life and a world finally set free awaits us, and a new beginning, however impossible it might seem, can take us by surprise, for Christ has triumphed over death. May God welcome Pope Francis to eternal life. I have asked the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet that all flags from the Commonwealth Government of Australia will fly at half-mast tomorrow as a sign of respect. And my sincere condolences to everyone who, for tonight, it will be a very difficult evening. Thank you.
Prime Minister Anthony Albanese speaking on the passing of Pope Francis. Flags will fly at half-mast across Australia. Our next guest is a Jesuit priest, a human rights lawyer and academic. He's also met Pope Francis on several occasions, and Father Frank Brennan joins me now. Father Brennan, big news today. No doubt you were, like many of us, buoyed by the appearance of the Pope yesterday, conducting blessings on Easter Sunday. How are you reflecting today on his passing?
Indeed. Well, a couple of months ago, Layla, of course, we all expected him to die within days, but he's a tough fella, and he very much obviously wanted to be with his faithful for Easter. And so how wonderful that he's been able to bow out with his Easter blessing, and to hear that wonderful tribute from Prime Minister Albanese quoting that Easter blessing. So I think there's a sense of roundedness, of the completion of a 12-year papacy where he's been a good and faithful servant, and may he rest in peace.
Before we go on to talk a little about his legacy, you've said he was good fun and engaging on the occasions that you met him. That's perhaps a surprise to people, you know, who revere him from afar. Tell us about those meetings. He
had a great sense of fun. I remember the first time I met him, I took him a bottle of the Seven Hill wine from the Jesuit winery in South Australia, and I presented it to him, and he said, "Ah, aqua sacra, thank you. Holy water, thank you very much." And he was absolutely delighted at that. The second time I met him, I was very privileged to be in the company of Miriam Rose Ungama, a very respected Aboriginal elder from the Northern Territory, and they were both in their wheelchairs, and it's an image that I'll carry with me forever, to see this affectionate Pope in his wheelchair reaching out to this old Aboriginal woman in her wheelchair and being able to share something of the simple faith journey that they'd made together. So he was a great presence.
Father, this is a role that he never expected to take. If you take us right back to the beginning, it was somewhat of a surprise to have a Pope elected from South America, a Jesuit Pope, and I don't think he expected to have that position.
although to be fair to the history, when John Paul II died, you might remember, there was some speculation at that time that he might have been in the running, but he was pipped at the post, we understand, by Cardinal Ratzinger, who became Benedict XVI. So definitely by the time Benedict retired, everyone thought that Bergoglio basically had run his race and that he was too old, and he definitely wasn't expecting to be elected. In fact, we know with his very homely approach to things, he'd not only booked his return ticket to Buenos Aires, but when he was elected, he had to ring his newsagent back in Buenos Aires and cancel the newspaper. And that was a clear sign that he had no expectation that he would have been elected on that occasion. But I think his election, Layla, is a sign that the Church was ready to move beyond Europe. And we'd been very faithfully served by very intellectual approaches by both Pope John Paul II and Pope Benedict. But I think what we got in Francis was someone with a very pastoral approach. The big surprise was that he was a Jesuit, and there'd never been a Jesuit Pope before. I am a Jesuit, so I was very pleased to see him as Pope. But of course, there are many in the Church who say it'll be a very long time before there's another Jesuit Pope. So I think we've been lucky to have this one for 12 years, and I think he's made a magnificent contribution in grounding the Church and moving it well beyond Europe and reaching out to the peripheries.
In many ways, he is known as something of a liberal, a reformer. What kind of things did he do that perhaps at times were controversial with more conservative clerics there in Rome?
Yes, although in terms of reform on dogma there wasn't much, or doctrine, and he tended to fudge the edges a bit, but that was his appeal in terms of his pastoral approach. And so, whereas his predecessors had made very strict rules about who could receive communion and things of that sort, he was not very troubled by that, and he made that very clear. And of course, on the neuralgic issue of gay and lesbian rights, he once famously said, well, who am I to judge? And so for him, it was always much more important to have the pastoral outreach. The other thing to note about him, Leila, is that he had a great dedication to what you might call popular piety, and that popular piety he enjoyed in all parts of the world, and he loved travelling. I remember at the time when I was in Rome, Cardinal Pell was alive at the time. He thought that Pope Francis was about to die. Well, it was Cardinal Pell who died, and meanwhile, off went Francis in his wheelchair to the Congo. So he was one who was very adventurous in reaching out, in trying to bring that pastoral approach.
Yes, he certainly wasn't expected to have made such a mark and to have been Pope for 12 years now, was he? He was an older Pope and seen somewhat as an interim Pope?
It was thought that he would be an interim Pope, but 12 years is a significant papacy, and of course within the Catholic Church he did a lot in order to set up what was called the system of synodality. Now, for those not in the Catholic Church, that's a bit of a gobbledygook. Synodality was basically about saying, I want the Church to be more democratic, I want it to be more engaged with people on the ground, and I want people on the ground in the Church to be able to participate in the decision making. And he was a great one for emphasising what we call discernment. That is, before the Pope would make a decision, that he would wait to hear from literally everybody before then determining what the right course forward was.
Is there any way of knowing whether this kind of openness and acceptance is to be continued in the next Pope, or are things just too secretive? We don't know who will get next.
We have no idea, and in fact we have no idea in spades, in part, Leila, because this Pope has very deliberately gone a different way from his predecessors. His predecessors used to appoint as cardinals key archbishops in the major sees around the world. This Pope has reached out through the peripheries. For example, we don't have a serving cardinal here in Australia except for the 44-year-old Redemptorist Ukrainian priest who was made a cardinal. But we do have cardinals in places like East Timor, Papua New Guinea and Tonga. and even Mongolia has a cardinal. So the fact that they're going to have places at the table and Australia will not shows what a broad field it might be.
Father, thank you very much for your insights. Father Frank Brennan.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
Thank you. Now, a current affair reporter, Steve Marshall, is at St Mary's Cathedral in Sydney. And Steve, the world only learned the news a little over an hour ago, but Australian Catholics have begun what will be quite a lengthy period of mourning.
That's right, Layla. St Mary's Cathedral behind me, regarded as the mother church for Australian Catholics. And I'm here in somewhat surreal conditions, not only because of the passing of Pope Francis, but as you might be able to see, flashes of lightning, there's thunder, it's all rolling in, and it's somewhat a surreal atmosphere on the steps of St Mary's, which is where I found Jose Arias. Jose, you're from Peru, but you have made your way here to the steps of St Mary's. Why?
Well, actually, I was swimming here, so then I received a notification from my family. So they text about this, well, terrible news for us as well, because in Peru we are Catholic. So that's why I came here to pray a little bit. So yes, to have a good memory about the Pope Francisco as well in Peru, in my country.
Look, I saw you on the steps. You were having a solemn moment to yourself, and I didn't want to interrupt, so I waited for you to finish. But can you tell me what you were thinking while you were just sitting there?
Well, I think good memories. So in my family we are strong Catholic, so since I came here I appreciate that for the Australian people as well. So I found many churches, so I think in this moment with the storm and the news, it was like something very sad for me as well, because all the Pope Francisco said around the world, it's I don't know how to say, it's something grateful for us, for me as well.
Now, you've got a personal story, don't you, about Pope Francis back in your homeland, Peru?
Yes, actually, I had a memories. I was wondering about how I met him close, like only 50 meters. So in my country, I did a volunteer. So in the moment, I was with like 1 million people around in the incredible mass. So that's chance for me. It was something like not happen usual for everyone. So we were doing many stuff for 5 days for only 1 day. No, it was incredible.
Incredible memories as a youth worker back in Peru and only 50 metres away from Pope Francis. Amazing stuff. Look, our thoughts are with you, Jose, and your fellow Catholics, okay?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Layla, a personal story there on the steps of St Mary's, and as I say, the weather is starting to roll in, but I don't think it will deter people like Jose coming down here and paying their respects. Back to you.
Yeah, Jose, one of millions of Catholics around the world learning the news and mourning Pope Francis. Steve Marshall, thank you very much.